Hello and welcome to Mining Review Africa in partnership with DRC Mining Week 2026. And today I'm speaking to Jonathan Hamisi, who's a Senior Policy Advisor and Geologist at IGF Mining, Sweden. Jonathan will be speaking at this year's DRC Mining Week taking place from the 17th to the 19th of June in Lubumbashi. By way of introduction, Jonathan has over 15 years of experience across the mining industry, academia, and government. His expertise span mineral exploration, mining operations, mine closure, resource governance, and policy development, with a strong focus on responsible mining practices. Jonathan, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Kurt. Happy to be here.
Let's just get straight into the questions. In your experience, how is the DRC positioning itself in the global race for critical minerals?
Yeah, I think the DRC has been positioning itself for the past 2 decades as a central and increasingly strategic player in the global critical supply chains by combining its well-known rich resource endowments with growing production and the gradual strengthening of its institutional and knowledge base. Beyond its well-known resource wealth, the country is seeing significant growth in production for key metals, particularly copper and cobalt. The country continued to attract large-scale investment and renew attention to geological knowledge and skill development, which are critical for sustaining long-term competitiveness. So just a few examples. So the DRC today produces over 70% of global cobalt and exported around 220 tons of cobalt and 3.4 million tons of copper in 2025 alone, placing it amongst the world's top producer. When it comes to copper production, it has increased roughly from 1 million tons a decade ago to close to 3 million today, driven by major projects. And I think the Kamoa-Kakula copper complex is a prime example of this, one of the highest grade copper discovery globally, which underpins production growth in the DRC. If we also look at mining exports, they are very substantial. Refined copper exports alone reached about 19.5 billion in 2024, with cobalt adding over $3 billion. Beyond copper, if we look at lithium, for example, the Manona Lithium project, one of the largest hard rock lithium pegmatite deposits globally, it also signals the DRC entry into future battery supply chain. At the same time, the establishment of the Geological Survey a few years ago and the growing engagements with university abroad in geology and engineering reflect effort to build local skills and knowledge systems. Exploration is also expanding beyond the copper belt into the Tanganyika and northern region, opening new frontier. But all in all, the next step for the DRC is not only production. The DRC needs stronger geological knowledge, stronger universities in geology and engineering, and a well-resourced geological survey. That is what will allow the country to move from a source of mineral to being a country that understands, manages, strategically develops its mineral wealth, and use it for its own industrialization. Governance and infrastructure developments will remain key enablers.
So, Jonathan, you know, the DRC's resource potential is well documented. If you have to go back many years ago, it was a key contributor to the global rubber industry, for instance. But let's look at critical minerals. How does the country ensure sustainable growth for its critical minerals potential, and most importantly, one that benefits its citizens?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think sustainable growth will depend on translating mining expansion into inclusive development through good governance, value additions, and I would even say now more than ever, urgent action in artisanal and small-scale mining, because when you look at the level of, I would say, employment in that subsector of the mining industry, it's employed the most people if you are to compare with large-scale mining. So while mining drives economic growth, the challenge is to ensure that it translates into jobs, revenues, long-term national development. And I mean, it is pretty clear for the DRC, mining dominates the economy. It accounts for over 90% of export and a significant share of GDP, with I think total export reaching nearly 30 billions in 2023. So economic growth remains strong for the years to come. It was at about 6.5% in 2024, again, largely driven by mining expansion. There are early discussions on national mineral strategy, which is a positive step towards long-term planning. However, as mentioned, the artisanal and small-scale mining sector continue to face critical challenges, including fatalities and unsafe working conditions. There is a real debate, but more importantly, urgent actions to be taken on the ground. Efforts to promote local processing and value additions, including the battery-related ambitions with the special economic zones and the current arrangement with Zambia, shows the attention to capture more value domestically, which is also very important. Sustainable growth will definitely require aligning the economic performance with governance, safety, and local value addition.
Absolutely. Now, Jonathan, you touched on value addition quite a few times in your answer there, and I'm sure that there'll be a lot of talk around this at DRC Mining Week in June.
Yeah.
In your opinion, how do we get it right? How do we beneficiate to ensure that whatever the mining sector is doing and is a part of benefits the economy and its citizens?
Yeah, I think when it comes to value addition, I think most of the time there is a tendency to believe that value addition is it's only done by moving forward in the value chain, which means entering finished products, end user products, etc. I think what is important for resource-rich country, and not just the DRC really, is to look at the mining industry, look at the entire value chain, and look at what's at this moment and now the country has available as assets, which it could use as competitive advantage. So looking into, so if, for example, the country has high energy production, for example, this, for example, gives room for more processing capacity. If the country has, for example, advanced skills, maybe it's also open rooms for manufacturing locally. So the competitive advantage comes from what assets the country already has. And that could mean for the DRC, for example, there is almost a spirit of entrepreneurship in all sectors of the economy in the DRC. So maybe value additions for the DRC might mean, and that has already started, looking into tapping into local supply for equipment, local supply for mining related services, etc. So local added solution is not necessarily meaning that the country has to go all the way to the end of the value chain.
Right. Now, Jonathan, you also mentioned artisanal mining, obviously a very important part of the DRC mining sector. How do we ensure that we can formalize this important sector and also ensure that artisanal miners feel that they are actually part and contributing to the DRC's economy?
Yeah, that's actually what I guess one of the tasks for the next decade in the mining industry that has to be taken I think, as a high priority because, as mentioned earlier, the artisanal and small-scale mining sector employs several hundreds of people in the DRC. Now, there has been a trend of moving towards, and that has been laid out quite well in the legislations, having what is called zone d'exploitation artisanale, which is basically area where designated for artisanal mining. Now, it is not enough to simply lay it out the letters in the legislation, because without proper geological studies, even if those ZEA have been designated, if the artisanal miners do not know where to mine, how to mine, etc., they will always resort to going back to large-scale mining and scavenge or high grades or stockpile from large-scale miners. So there is a need to have support, for institutional support for mapping those designated area, support from geologists, from engineers that has to come up with mine design, potentially processing plant if there is any to be on site, even if it's only very basic processing. So there is a need for a institutional support, which must include geological mapping services, engineering services, and processing services, whether it is done on site or off site. And it's the only one way we will be able in this industry to give back the dignity to the miners, where they can see that they are supported by the government and where they can see fair payments for the production that's come from artisanal mines.
Great stuff. Thank you, Jonathan, for that. Now let's move on to more global affairs. And how is the DRC positioning itself in relation to the interest in critical minerals of countries such as Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, and the United Arab Emirates?
Yeah, I think the DRC is positioning itself within a more diversified and competitive geopolitical landscape than it used to be. It's attracting new kind of partner who are seeking to secure access to critical mineral. It's reflecting a shift toward a more multipolar competition for resources with new kind of investors outside of the traditional ones, the Australians, the Canadians, the Chinese, Americans, and Europeans. And these new investors are bringing capital, but also their own strategic interests. So if you look at the UAE and even Saudi Arabia, they are increasingly engaging in mineral deals and upstream investments. In the case of the UAE, engagements with the DRC is not only about mining assets. If you look at investment in infrastructure through the DP world, the UAE is involved in the development of the Banana deepwater ports on the DRC Atlantic coast in Congo Central. So this project is designed as the DRC first deepwater maritime gateway. And for the mining sector, this matters because logistics are part of competitiveness and also sometimes bottlenecks. So if the DRC can improve Atlantic access, it can reduce transport costs, strengthen control over trade flows, it can improve overall investment environment for minerals, not only copper, cobalt, but also lithium, tin, tantalum, and other critical minerals. So if the DRC is capable of leveraging the position that it has today as the second largest copper producer, dominant cobalt supplier, with mineral exports, as I mentioned earlier, exceeding 15 billion in average annually, it is capable of putting itself in the position of a strategic partners for those countries. In the case of Indonesia, so the Indonesian experience with resource-based industrialization, it's also relevant in shaping policy discussion. Indonesia has used export restriction to expand its processing capacity in the nickel sector and adds more added value to its products before exports. That could be a place for the DRC to learn from what have been the opportunities and the challenges into that in that process. So the DRC is emerging in any case as a strategic partner in a multipolar minerals economy, but it must ensure partnerships deliver long-term national value rather than a deal-by-deal return.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Jonathan. Now, one final question. I understand that you're speaking for the first time at DRC Mining Week this year, but it's not your first time attending the event. Tell us about the importance of DRC Mining Week in shaping the future of the country's mining sector.
Yeah, I guess the DRC Mining Week has evolved a lot in recent years. It's went from a relatively, I would say, modest industry gathering into a leading mining platform in Central Africa. Over the past 2 decades, the event has grown in scale and influence also alongside the expansion of the DRC mining sector. So it reflects the country's increasing importance in global supply chain and also provide a space where governments, investors, operators align on priorities and partnership. From what I understood, the event is now in its 21st edition.
That is correct.
Marking over 2 decades of engagement in the sector, and congratulations about it. The attendance has also grown significantly over time. So the earlier editions, I think up until the 2010s, attracted a few thousand people. But now from what I read, more recent editions have exceeded 10,000 visitors. So that's also is reflecting growing investors' interest in the conference. The attendance do not only include government leaders and mining company, but it also includes several investors from several countries. It also now features hundreds of exhibitors, high-level policy forum, and investment platform. So I think in that sense, the DRC Mining Week mirrors the trajectory of the DRC mining sector itself, from, let's say, a recovery industry in the early 2000s to a globally strategic mining up to date. So it's not just a conference anymore, but a platform that actively shapes investment decisions, policy debates, and the future direction of the sector. So if you want to understand where the DRC mining sector is going, DRC Mining Week is where those conversations are happening in real time.
Well, thank you for those insights, Jonathan. Jonathan Hamisi, Senior Policy Advisor of IGF Mining in Sweden. Thank you very much for your time today, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in person in a few weeks' time at DRC Mining Week.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to that.